like to with that music.
Okay, thank you everybody for coming to our panel tonight on what is the role of the media for the left. Just very quickly about the organization that's hosting this. We're Platypus Affiliated Society. We're the chapter here at Houston. We're an international group. We have chapters in London, in Serbia, in Tokyo, in Germany, and our goal is sort of the reconstitution of an emancipatory politics and a left in the present. So we do things like reading groups on this campus, we host panels, and we also have coffee breaks. And sometimes we have teach-ins, like I did a teach-in on the German Revolution last Thursday. Tonight's panel topic, this is very topical, to use that word twice, because of what's happening right now, is on the role of media in the left. So I thought I would read the prompt very quickly, and then I would introduce our panelists. Okay, so here's the prompt. From fake news to alternative facts, the 2016 election cycle normalized cynical attitudes towards the press. Fake news and alternative facts became popular terms. Snopes and PolitiFact notwithstanding, 2016 was not the first time in history that the news media has been criticized for playing a part in distracting, distorting, and misdirecting public political opinion. The left has historically played a role in both agitating for political change and educating the oppressed classes about the ideology of the dominant classes. The danger, however, is that in imposing the current state of affairs, the left may serve as an ideological screen for the next stage of capitalism. So we ask panelists to consider the following questions. What is the role of agitation and propaganda for the left today? How does it differ from the historical left's use of agitation and propaganda? How should the left approach free speech? How, if at all, does this differ from past leftists? How has the left's understanding of social responsibility and individual liberty been clarified or distorted? And then finally, what new social media models, if any, hold promise for educating the left and its movement at large, and how can these forms be seen as better and or worse than forms found in the legacy media? So I'll introduce everybody starting from Michael, who's closest to me. Michael Woodson is a radio host for LivingArt. It's on KPFT on Thursdays. Next then is Secunda Williams.
Secunda Joseph.
Secunda Joseph. She works for Smart Media.
Yes, I'm a smart media director with Project Curate and BLMHTX, and I host a show on Arbor Radio.
Perfect, awesome. And then after that is Egberto Willies. He has his radio show Politics Done Right and a website called Politics Done Right.
Right.com.
And then after him is David Barsamian of Alternative Radio, and he has some literature as well. So, any preference for who wants to start opening remarks? Maybe we can start with Michael, since I introduced everybody in that order. I've made an executive decision.
Okay. Well, I'll just read mine. That's all right.
Just quickly, just to give the structure, we'll have about 10-12 minutes for opening remarks. I'll just kind of do a one like this. It's just to find a place where you can have a comfortable ending of your remarks. Then we'll have about, 2 to 3 minute responses from everybody. And then the whole rest of the time, we'll have Q&A for everyone, and we can have a great discussion on that part. Okay.
All right. First, by way of an introduction, I had 16 years of Catholic education. By way of church charity, scholarship, and sacrifice of mom and dad, I graduated from the University of St. Thomas with a degree in philosophy and English. I was an Aristotelian and a Thomist, which is not a leftist. I taught Catholic high school and San Jacinto College while getting a master's and a PhD in English here at U of H. I was immersed in the leftism of liberation theology in the 60s and 70s, like Jesus or Teilhard de Chardin. I saw the 60s, 70s civil rights, feminism, ecologism, anti-war, and anti-nuclear movements. I lived in gay Montrose in the 70s and 80s. In the 80s at UH first, I was educated by the literary canon and structuralism. One famous teacher here was Martin S. Day, who wrote a series called The History of English Literature Books. And Marx and Freud still had credibility back then. By the time I took my PhD in '96, U of H was well into postmodernism. My PhD work was an amalgamation of structuralism and postmodernism, a pastiche for sure. I taught college composition. At the same time, I was a campaign manager for a friend who happened to run for U.S. Congress in 96 and 98. I saw from the inside the early days of the Republican Harris County, Texas being blue until the 90s. In 2001, I decided it was necessary for a professor to understand 9/11 and diversity. I met Seva Sawar, who was pretty prominent. She's since moved to LA just recently, but she was in charge of a group. She was the founder and organizer of Voices Breaking Boundaries, and at an event, I teamed up with her, became part of her non-denominational multi-art organization. She asked me to do a KPFT radio show for the organization, and I founded, produced, and hosted LivingArt in 2002. What was my role at KPFT Pacifica? I believed in its mission. To quote Pacifica, in radio broadcasting to provide an order for creative energy and to contribute to a lasting understanding between nations and between the individuals of all nations, races, creeds, and color, to gather and disseminate information on the causes of conflict between any and all of such groups, and through any and all means compatible to promote the study of political and economic problems and the causes of religious, philosophical, and racial antagonism. The mission was created by a post-war 1940s in Berkeley by a World War II pacifist objector. As non-paid staff KPFT, I did a kind of investigative art journalism which focused primarily on community art. I had some contact with notable leftist artists such as Eve Eisler, Margot Kidder, Patti Smith, Tariq Ali, Daniel Ellsberg, Anisha Bani, Mel Chin, Mark Beckhoff, Dean Baker, Claire Spark, David Barsamian, Reverend Billy and the Church of Stop Shopping, Bread and Puppets, Ronald Reagan's Institute for the Criminally Insane, Farnoosh Mashari, David Solnit, Rebecca Solnit, Adam Curtis, and so on. So prominent leftists. I interviewed various leftist organizations, the RCP, the CP, USA, the Greens, Platypus, reading groups and publications. I interviewed anarchists and political journalists. I searched far and wide for various kinds of local artists and art organizations that met with the Pacifica mission. Project Row Houses, Mecca, the Station Museum, Diverse Work, Super Happy Funland, the Sophomore House, Earthwire, Shade Community Center, Artist Rescue Mission, Rothko Chapel, Manil, CAM, Asian Society, Talento Bilingue, the Houston Nazos, the Artery, and so on. I first visited KPFT in the 1970s. Before 2002, when I started as a non-paid staff member there. I call this the Lord Loxley era. Lord Loxley, if you know local Montrose color, back in the day, was a local color and a legend in his own time who wandered the streets of old Montrose in a purple cloak and sometimes slept at the station. The KPFT had a punk edge in the 70s. I thought keeping KPFT community focused that way was true, and that the 70s meshed well with the local art scene of the 2000s. I saw the rise of graffiti art park, and slam poetry. On LivingArt, I interviewed a wide range of people, from those inspired by Dr. Seuss to those who practice body hook art. I interviewed mostly local artists, thousands of them, on average 3 a week, for 16 years. Painters, poets, writers, actors, dancers, musicians, sculptors, art of every race, gender, religion, and nationality. I would say 99% of the artists I interviewed would not shy away from being called left. A few claimed that art didn't have to be political. I did all this by networking a fabulous community who are always willing and eager to share the talents with the KPFT community and with the support of the station and the people who were working with me on the show. What was my role? Per Pacifica, to quote again, to provide an outlet for creative energy and to continue and to contribute to a lasting understanding between nations and between the individuals of all nations, races, creeds, and colors to gather and disseminate information on the causes of conflict between any and all of such groups, and through any and all means compatible to the purpose of this, to promote the study of political and economic problems and of the causes of religious, philosophical, and racial antagonisms. Is this the left? It identifies as the left. Pacifica's archives have amazing voices. They have the voices of Baldwin, MLK, Malcolm X, Angela Davis, Betty Friedan, Studs Terkel, Noam Chomsky. I have a USB and more, but I have a USB at home with 1,350 hours of such voices, 64 gigabytes. I also have every show I've done, thousands of hours. So I am an archive, a library. Truth be known, libraries are not a populous place. I've spent time there. The media is kind of the opposite. The current media is kind of the opposite of a library. It is a popular place. If I may say so, both social and legacy media promote what's new, what's fast, what's immediate, and instant, popular. It is not in touch, nor cares to be in touch with history, and certainly not with the history of the left, which I take to center on Marx, who was pretty good on the task of social responsibility. Our current media is all new news, a cycle. It's immediacy, not about the ultimate task or purpose of humanity, but a getting by in the best possible system we can come up with in barbarism. No ultimate purpose. Like Billy Pilgrim in Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse-Five, the media and society are unstuck in time. When I think of the early days of free speech in media, I think of pamphlets like Thomas Paine's Common Sense or Rosa Luxemburg's Reform or Revolution. But when I think of Facebook's motto, it's free and always will be, I get vertigo. I get unstuck in time. So, in conclusion, am I the left? I am a non-paid staffer at Pacifica. Is there a left? I think it is for Pacifica to ask that question. I think that's its good role. And for there to be a role of the media for the left, then there would need to be a left.
Can you remind me what we sharing again? Just who I am and what
Talking about what you think the role of the media is.
Okay, the role.
Yeah.
Okay. So again, my name is Secunda Joseph, and I first started working in media with Trey Magazine, which is a small, a local publication that is birthed right out of Third Ward, right down the street, by a woman by the name of Stephanie Coleman. Stephanie Coleman worked for media outlets all throughout. She had all kinds of jobs in New York, came back to Houston where she was from, and decided that folks from her community needed a voice, and she wanted to use her gifts and talents to do that. So that was my first introduction with the media. I worked with them right out of college, and I began to focus on, because social media at the time was really hot, and I put a lot of time and energy and understanding like our relationship with social media. So I managed the social media campaigns, and then a little while after that, we did a couple of shows. You talk about Pacifica, and when I first started working for Stephanie, I met a guy by the name of Zen. I'm sure you both know who Zen. Zen is the first day at work. I met Zen, and Zen was talking about the work that he wanted to do outside of, because he also had a show on Pacifica. For him, it was a very challenging relationship. Zen, African American brother, very centered, very community centered, and he didn't feel like he had the freedom to say and do the things that were important to him in that particular space. Zen had a dream. Zen eventually launched his own station, which is called All Real Radio. My show is on that show now. 2 years after launching All Real Radio, Zen passed away in a car accident in Denver, where he was expanding All Real in Denver to where his home was. And I say that to say my relationship, and I think a lot of times you talk about folks from the African American community, and I don't want to speak for anybody else, but I would also maybe suggest other people of color, I'm sure, have a very shifty relationship, even with the word left. I'm uncomfortable saying I'm left. When I think of left, I think of the folks that MLK wrote about in
The letter from the
the Birmingham jail, when he said, my brothers, you want us to wait, our things that are important within our community are never the center. For some reason, whenever we get to where we need to be, we work together. Oftentimes, Black folks feel like we're forgotten, whether they are folks who in the past were part of the Communist Party or Marxist Party or you name it. There's always been this relationship. Is this for us? Here I am, it's 2019, and I still have that same question. I don't know. I very rarely use the term left. And to be quite honest, when I think of the left, when I think of the role of the left, I think of adversary. I think of what are the lesser of the two evils. I think I'd rather duke it out with folks on the left and be able to, free ourselves of oppression in that way than duke it out with Trump. And I think if you ask most people who were honest enough to say, most African American folks, particularly people who are involved in organizing, you would probably get, not with everybody, but I would say can't speak for everybody, but in the rooms by ourselves, they would tell you what I'm telling you now. But I am an optimist. You never know. There is always hope. And speaking of that, when I think of our relationship, particularly with social media, because social media can be very human if we allow it. It is the modern day word of mouth opportunity. It's like word of mouth on steroids. People go directly and talk directly to people that they trust, people that they believe. And if there is a responsibility for folks who claim that they are left, I think the responsibility would be to use the tools in the best way possible, not be so reactionary when you see a headline to, kind of mock or harness the hype in a way that will work for whatever those particular goals is. And what I mean by that is, like, right now there's conversations that's happening, and whether it's mainstream media or even whether it's alternative media, whether it's shows like mine or whatever, a lot of times instead of us, we do a much better job, I think, folks who are working alternative media, but still, instead of us changing the conversation, right, we use we got 2 hours on the show, hour on the show, we use 40 minutes or most of that time laying out the same conversations that are happening in mainstream media instead of redirecting our audience. And I think that's one of the things that is definitely our responsibility. Right now, when I think of in terms of like propaganda, propaganda now is the truth. There's so many as we see it. There are so many lies that are consistently being told. There's so many half-truths. There's so many, even with media, that it's clickbait, right? How can we get these, how many clicks can we get? How can we get these dollars? And then it's fluff. There's nothing being told. People know less now, and we have more people reading. We have more children, high school students who are interested in news and what's going on. But I think we're missing the opportunity by still feeding them fluff when really this could be a time where we can educate the masses. That's it.
So you completely changed what I was going to be talking about. Completely. Okay. First of all, my name is Egberto Willies, and I'm going to just say a little bit about myself first, because she brought up so many subjects that just hit me in the heart that I think it's more productive for me to talk about. First of all, I'm from Panama, Central America, so I have a different lived experience. I'm this black guy from Panama, and the lived experience is different, which I think gives a lot of opportunities to do a whole lot of things. When I came to the States, I went to the, a little band director in Panama. I had a friend who was a band director in Brenham, Texas. So I went to a college called Blinn College. I don't know if anybody ever heard about that. Blinn College. And the first thing that I remember going to Blinn is when I came into Houston, they asked me, where are you going? And I went to the Greyhound bus station. No, the first thing I remember is in 1979, paying $40 to go downtown to the Greyhound bus station. When I got there, she said, where do you want to go? I said, I want to go to Brenham, Texas. Where? Brenham, Texas. She said, there's no Brenham, Texas. I showed her the book. She said, this is Brenham, Texas. I said, okay, could I get a ticket to Brenham, Texas? Didn't like Brenham, or Brenham, Texas, so I decided to go to work like hell that summer and went to UT Austin, and I'm a mechanical engineer. That's what I got my degree. I worked for corporate America for six years because I've always been hard-headed, and I've been always a lefty out there marching for South Africa, marching to get the University of Texas out of South Africa, and going to the churches in Austin and saying, you guys need to march for us, and them telling us, Jesus really didn't condemn slavery, for which I left the church permanently and became a humanist, but I digress. After my daughter went to school, my daughter went to college, I've always been a blogger, but I always blogged under a pseudonym, because having a software company, you don't want people to know, who you are, and that'll really mess your business up pretty nicely. After my daughter left, I'm in Kingwood. When she left and went off to school, it was like freedom. And it was now time to explore what I really wanted to do. What I really wanted to do was doing something positive. I've always been a complainer of the capitalist system. I've always been a complainer of how things work. And a friend of mine said, well, why the hell don't you do something about it? Gave up the company, gave up everything, turned into a poor person, and started doing this full time. One of the interesting things and this is what, when you talked about the left not being comfortable, I understand that wholeheartedly. I participate with the Coffee Party USA, Daily Coast. I go out to the Netroots Nation every single year and all of that. And it's interesting that the spaces that we go into are generally all white, talking about issues that mostly affect other people within the country. And one of the things that I use myself for there is to point that out in all these different spaces that we go to. Why is that important? That is important because as we sit down here and discuss the media on the left and what are we going to do, one of the biggest things that hamper us as the left is that this left that preaches inclusivity and all these other issues really will never make it, because it doesn't comprise the combination of people that gives you that majority that you really have. In other words, the majority of people in the United States, the 33% of white people, the 90% of black people, the 80% of Latinos, and Latinos is a bad thing because I'm black, I'm Latino, I'm all those different things, and that's a horrendous description because it doesn't do any justice. When I walk into a room, I'm a damn black man, right? But the thing about it is, the left, by not consolidating for real the groups of people that it represents, it creates a hindrance. So what has been my solution, and this is a personal thing, and it's, believe it or not, similar to what you were talking about, where you don't feel inclusive, you go off and do your other thing. I started with my other thing. In other words, before there was politics done right, there was liberal politics done right. I created a database of people. I created a website. I created all these different platforms, and then I became a part of KPFT by extension. In other words, I was hoping, or not hoping, but what we did is we started from a point of I don't need something else. But we start off what you have individually, and I think and this, everybody can do that, right? So that everything else becomes an appendage of what you're doing. So what that gives the freedom to do, whether you're left or otherwise, is it allows you to say, well, I will go as far as I need to go over here to try to get change. But if I don't get change, c'est la vie, so what? Yeah. You get that, you grab that kind of attitude. Talking about social media, and since we kind of brought up a little stuff about the racing, social media is an interesting animal, right? Because I love social media. And by the way, you don't make money on clicks anymore. You only make money on clicks if you're a big company that can get all the big timers. Otherwise, you don't make a damn penny. But subscriptions, and it's hard to get subscriptions too. But the thing about it is, we have a huge left on Facebook, and this may sound out of left field a bit. I bring a lot of people onto the shows that we do. The biggest show I had and this was disconcerting, but I also found a way around it. The biggest show I had. You remember when Cornell X, there was this teacher who gave the Muslim kid, what's her name? A blue-eyed blonde woman, and I by the way, I put my shows on Facebook Live and all of that. That was the highest rated show on Facebook, on a left-wing show, visited by mostly left-wing people. So when I want to get a message out, you were talking earlier about Facebook and how distinct it is or whatever. When I want to get my message out, I make the combination of putting titles and highlights to attract people, and then go ahead and give the message. And then sometimes tell them within the message, why did I have to do this to get you here?
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? So there are a lot of ways to look at these particular issues. But later on, I'll get more kind of detail if folks ask questions, but I don't want to take too much time.
So, brothers and sisters, comrades, good evening. Thanks for being here, and thanks to Houston Platypus for organizing this event. And it's great to be on with Michael and Secunda and Egberto. Mm-hmm. Thank you. So, I do a program called Alternative Radio out of Boulder, Colorado. It's in its 33rd year. I don't have any background in journalism or in any of the work I'm doing, but I decided I wasn't very happy with the corporate media, and I launched this program quite on a whim. And it used to be broadcast on KPFT, your venerable Pacifica station, until it was summarily taken off by the new program director, Don Freeman. He's put alternative radio on the HD channel, which basically means it's eliminated because you have to have a special radio to receive the HD channel. So there's something you can do in a very concrete way. His email address is don@kpft.org. don@kpft.org. Ask him to bring back alternative radio to the main signal of KPFT. By the way, this doesn't cost Pacifica or KPFT any money. It's a free program. So it's not a budgetary consideration. So this is a very concrete thing you can do, because KPFT, when I started alternative radio in 1986, was one of the first stations in the country to pick it up. So it would be great to get it back on. Toward that end, I'd like you to sign up with your email and your name written clearly. Is there anyone here old enough to remember penmanship? One person. Please write clearly, because often when I go back to Boulder, I can't read 3/4 of the addresses. And rest assured, I'm not going to share this with the FBI and the NSA, because they already have all your material. They already have all your information. So let me talk about this amorphous thing we call the left. You know, we invoke this name all the time, but what does it mean in concrete terms? You know, and here I have a little prop. You can see it's an acorn, and we all want to be a mighty oak tree at some point, but we often don't want to do the work to become a mighty oak tree. And much of the left historically has subverted itself by internal sectarianisms, gender biases, and racism. I'll give you a perfect example. Someone from, June Jordan, great African-American poet, whose mother was from Panama.
Oh, really?
Incidentally, yeah. She died a few years ago. I had the privilege of meeting with her and doing a few programs. She said, there are a lot of Stalinists out there. A lot of people feel like they are right and no one else is right. And she advises people to chill a little bit. And she wrote this poem on this topic of sectarianism called A Short Note to My Very Critical and Well-Beloved Friends and Comrades. First they said I was too light. Then they said I was too dark. Then they said I was too different. Then they said I was too much the same. Then they said I was too young. Then they said I was too old. Then they said I was too much a nationalist. Then they said I was too silly. Then they said I was too angry. Then they said I was too idealistic. Then they said I was too confusing altogether. Make up your mind, they said. Are you militant or sweet? Are you vegetarian or meat? Are you straight or are you gay? And I said, hey, it's not about those things. It's about my mind. And on the issue of Palestine, a topic that I've covered extensively over the decades, she said this: I can't think of another subject in the world today or in the United States that people approach with more trepidation and fear. And you know, there's this curious thing, I don't know if you've heard about this or experienced this in Texas, called PEP, Progressive Accept Palestine. So, you know, people are engaged, they're active on all kinds of issues, very important issues, from Keystone XL to Black Lives Matter to #MeToo and, you know, other organizations. But when it comes to Palestine, there's a curious silence. Now, that has been broken because of the courage of a handful of women like Ilhan Omar and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Ayanna Pressley, and a few others. But this is what Edward Said wrote about this topic. Said, you should all be familiar with. You know, one of the most important, I think, political thinkers and literary critics in recent years. Unfortunately, he passed away in 2003. I've got a new book. Actually, it's an old book reissued with a new introduction with Said. It was Said who taught us how Arabs and Muslims were being categorized in extremely derogatory and racist tropes. So you had, you know, the oversexed sheikh, you had, of course, the terrorist, you had the wanton killer who seems to have nothing better to do than to kill people because he's, you know, bloodthirsty Arabs and the like. Or on the other extreme, the other reductionism would be, you know, the very sexy Arabs, harems and odalisques and voluptuous women who are available, for virtually nothing. This is what, so Said broke through that kind of reductionism and really started to talk about what these civilizations and great cultures were really about, not just some throwaway lines about Arab terrorists and Palestinian fanatics. Permission to narrate is one of his kind of great topics. Who represents the other? You'll often find in the corporate media the other is represented not by the other, but usually by white representatives who are very safe politically and have a range of political wisdom, from A to B. That's the scope of their perspective. They don't have an A to Z perspective. So representations are extremely critical. Who gets to speak? Palestine, Edwin Said said, is a thankless cause, one in which if you truly serve, you get nothing back but opprobrium, abuse, and ostracism. Palestine is the cruelest, most difficult cause to uphold, not because it is unjust, but because it is just, yet dangerous to speak about. How many friends avoid the subject? How many colleagues want none of Palestine's controversy? How many bien passant liberals have time for Bosnia and Chechnya and Somalia and Rwanda and South Africa and Nicaragua? But when it comes to human and civil rights for Palestine, nothing. Why is that? Said said, I have been unable to live an uncommitted or suspended life. I have not hesitated to declare my affiliation with an extremely unpopular cause. It is the responsibility of intellectuals, as Chomsky and Gramsci both said, to speak not just truth to power, but also to speak truth to the powerless. Often people in power know what's going on, as you were suggesting in our earlier remarks, that some of your remarkable representatives, both in the Senate and the House of Representatives from this state, actually do know the score. But in order to score political points and to get advantage, they speak the pro-Trumpista line in this state. It's a very extraordinary time right now. I know you've heard that before, but I think it is, particularly because of the centrality of women in opposition, the centrality of women in dissent. Not just Ilhan Omar and the other congresspeople I mentioned, Rashida Tlaib, the first Palestinian American Muslim to be elected to the Congress, Stacey Abrams in nearby Georgia, Emma Gonzalez, this remarkable 17-year-old student from Parkland High in Florida, electrifying orator, just a tremendous public speaker, who just ignited yet again the debate about guns in this country. What about the 16-year-old Swedish girl, Greta Thunberg, who, because of the climate disruption, and I call it climate disruption, when I saw Ralph Nader recently, he chided me for saying climate change. It's too passive. It's too kind. It's like changing your clothes, changing your hairstyle or something. No, it's climate disruption, and it's extremely violent. And she started a student strike in Sweden, which spread all across Europe and even into the United States on March 15. Millions of students walked out, heeding the words of this remarkable young teenager. There are so many other examples of that. The scale of protest and organizing is unprecedented in my memory. If you had any doubts about that, the Women's March on January 21st, 2017 should have disabused you of that. The largest gathering in opposition, mostly organized by women, and most of the participants were women. And women have been a solid majority in all subsequent big protests. And when it comes to grassroots organizing, it's often 70 to 80% women. So there's something happening here, like that Buffalo Springfield song. There's something happening, and I think that's a very positive development, where women now are after being in the background for so long, are in the foreground and are leading the resistance and are prominent voices of dissent. Now, building community, how do you do that? I have a little skit here. Turn off your TV, get off the internet, get out of the house, drop your tweets and get into the streets. Get off of Facebook and into the face of the powerful. The heat in the streets will melt the creeps in the suites. For all of you, particularly the younger people in this audience, it's absolutely, I think, crucial that you get engaged in a very active way and get out into the streets. Yeah, get on to the tweets, but then leave them aside. It's important to get engaged. There's a lot of kindling out there. We just have to find the palito, that's Southwestern Spanish for the fire that will light all that kindling that's out there. There's enormous scope now for intervention and radical intervention. Even if you talk to diehard people on the right, if you ask them, do you want your kid to drink clean water? Do you want your child to play in a park that's well maintained? Do you want the toilets to work? Do you want the environment protected? Do you want affordable housing? Do you want affordable health care? On issue after issue, you'll find that people, even on the right, except for, of course, perhaps for some evangelical American Taliban, as I call them, who believe, like Mike Pompeo, our distinguished Secretary of State, who said just the other day that he is guided by the Bible. Well, he's an unguided missile, indeed. When he was the representative from Wichita, he was known as the congressman from Boeing, because Boeing has a big military base plant there. And he's continuing now with returning the Golan Heights to Israel, seizing the Golan Heights and giving it de facto control over that. Where is the discussion about this, other than this handful of women that dared to speak out? And notice how they were crucified for speaking out, particularly Ilhan Omar, but also the others. They're afraid of intelligent women of color who speak out and speak courageously and bravely. And that's why the backlash is so sharp, because they are so afraid of their eloquence and their ability to articulate, different positions. So is it keeping up with the Kardashians, or is it keeping up with our values, what we see as a possible left society, where the media has to play a central role? And as Chomsky has said, it's very important for institutions of concentrated power to keep people alone and isolated. That's what it's all about, to keep you atomized, separated. Watch your Game of Thrones. Hey, the new season is starting. Are you ready? Whether, and worry about whether Brad Pitt's going to remarry Angelina Jolie, or, will James Harden be the unanimous choice for MVP in the NBA, or is J.J. Watt the best defensive player in football? Argue about those things. Have debates. Call up, listen to these talk shows. Chomsky, I talked to him quite a bit about these kinds of issues. He said, it's very instructive to listen to AM talk shows. Do any of you ever tune in? Why do I say that? People who call into these shows have remarkable information about very obscure topics. Like they'll say, Jose Altuve in the 2016 playoff series, he swung at a pitch that was outside the strike zone. He never should have done that. And that would have been ball 4, and Houston would have won the game. And then someone calls up and says, well, don't you dare criticize Altuve. He's the best player and the best hitter. He's, absolutely fantastic. And there's wow, there's a spirited discussion about nothing. Nothing of consequence. But, that's what a lot of people have been reduced to, thinking that they can intervene on this level of sports, but not on levels of politics. Oh, it's too complicated, I can't deal with that, so I'll just talk about sports. So those programs give the lie to the propaganda that Americans are too dense or they're too stupid, they can't master complex information. Complex information, bottom of the ninth, Ted Williams is at the plate, Allie Reynolds is pitching for the New York Yankees. The pennant is at stake, and Williams strikes out on a ball that was not in the strike zone. Having information like that, where does that come from? And having that mastery. So the power is there. It just needs to be focused on things that matter. And that's where organizations are key. That's where young people can get engaged and find out, by finding kindred spirits and moving forward. So, but we are distracted from distraction by distraction. Too many of us are, distracted. That's, by the way, that's an T.S. Eliot poem. We are distracted from distractions. How to stay focused, and that's why I think organizations are so critical to foster social change. So I could go on and on. I could also do something very funny if you like, but let me just wind up. Edwin Said, I've got some CDs here. Ilan Pape of Israel, the dissident historian. Dar Jamel, climate disruption. Leilani Farha, a Canadian-Iranian woman talking about what's happened to housing in this country and how unaffordable it is. And Benjamin Hett, how Hitler happened. We live in a time where fascism is in the air. It's not just a whiff. It's very strong and it's very dangerous. And Benjamin Hett, whom I interviewed at Hunter College a couple of months ago, talked about how the Nazis perfected the simple message repeated over and over again, like Crooked Hillary, lock her up, drain the swamp, build the wall. Simple messages repeated over and over again were able to win over the German people at a time when Germany in the 1920s was at the apex of European civilization. Within a decade, it had descended into the most barbarous regime perhaps in human history. So I'm going to close with just one line from Frederick Douglass. You've heard this before, but you can't hear it enough. If there's no struggle, there's no progress. Those who profess to favor freedom, yet deprecate agitation, are men and women who want crops without plowing the ground. They want rain without thunder and lightning. They want the ocean without the roar of its mighty waters. The struggle may be a moral one, or it may be a physical one, or it may be both moral and physical, but it must be a struggle. Power concedes nothing without a demand. Thank you.
So now we'll just have brief responses from the panelists, sort of 2 to 3 minutes for each of you of what you thought of the other panelists' opening remarks, and then the rest of the time we'll spend with the Q&A. So if Michael, if you wanted to get your thoughts, just 2 to 3 minutes.
Well, I think David has a lot of nerve coming here talking about, Houston sports like that. Hard, come on. Anyway, I don't know. I have a few concerns about the left, and it really doesn't speak too loudly to what the panelists say, who largely I agree with, and would be. It seems that we have a lot of faith in the energy that we call the left, but we really can't define it or know it or don't identify around it. And we don't have a task, we don't have a direction, and you begin to sound Stalinistic if you start talking in that direction, which I am not interested in, so I guess I just have more questions than answers. Some of the points that were made bring up the issue of governance, which I think we got to slow down, talk about government and governance and what that means to us and whether we are represented and to what degree, and if our government even has a notion of what it is to be left. And then we're talking about movementism, and I have questions about like, well, how do I know if the movement that I'm joining is actually taking a direction that I would like to see the end of, or that I should belong to, or will it do harm? It just seems to me like a lot of unplanning, and I mean, that's my, it's not really a response to the panel, except the harden I really meant. But he's going to be like straight up MVP first ballot.
So in here first.
I'm more baseball than basketball, so that Altuve is my man.
So I think I will share. We talked about, when you mentioned community, and we talked about just even going on about what our role is. And I think the first thing that comes to my mind is posture. And even when you think about movement, talking about movement, posture. So Ella Baker and Ida B. Wells are two women who, Ida B. Wells back in during the anti-lynching movement, I mean, she was out there like, she did it. If you're not familiar with her, she used her own money to do her own investigating, did social services work. She did everything within her power to stop the lynching, basically. And she, like many folks at one time, believed, because of the propaganda of that time, her being even a black woman who was formerly enslaved as a kid, believed that folks who were lynched, that they could just do right. They could just act right. So they could just play the part, until her friends who did right and act right and played the part and were successful lost their lives and livelihood and everything. And as she began to investigate and put herself with the community and to search and to see, she found that the story of her friends were not like, it just didn't happen one time. This was consistent. And I say that because you mentioned community. We don't know if we're not in it. And I'll add Ella Baker, who believed that people didn't need a leader. They just needed the light, and people lead themselves. And whether we are in organizations like the ones that I'm a part of, or we are media representatives, we are not leaders. We are a community of people who each have a particular role within that community. One of the things that I'm very proud about and that I love about the Black Lives Matter movement, unlike other movements in the past, which is why women now have the opportunity to be centered. In the civil rights movement, women were as active. When you think about the Black Power movement, if you really go back and look, there was still 80% of the women doing it. It's always 80%, especially black women, like, where you want a church, whatever. We always doing the work. And leading, doing the work and leading, but sometimes we don't have the mic. But because of this idea of decentralized leadership, who Ella Baker talked about long ago, who she taught folks in SNCC long ago, who was pushing this, who was the first person I can find, if y'all know better, let me know, who I heard describe what it meant to be have decentralized leadership. Because now this is in our system, right? It's a part of our language and our conversation. There's a lot more opportunity for us to see women. And yeah, that's all I got.
Kind of teeing off with David when he talked about, he kind of spoke about how folks are completely and entirely not into things that are important. And my thing in talking, I talk to people, all kinds of people, all over the place, all over the country. And the one thing I notice is, yes, that's the behavior. The behavior is they concentrate on things that they think they have control over. And one of the greatest things in America is that people feel that they don't have control. One of the things that they feel is that somehow it's not their purview to do certain things. So one of the great things I like with being able to do our type of media on social media and that sort of stuff is now you have bidirectionality. If you have bidirectionality, if you create your sphere of influence and people think to like you, or they have confidence in you, and suddenly they can also talk to you, and in being able to talk to you, they can see that you're learning from them too, right? Suddenly their lives matter, and so suddenly they realize that they can make a difference, and then you move that on further to show that, hey, this is how society works, and you can really make a difference. Kind of to what Michael had to say about direction. Does the movement have direction, or what does the movement really mean? I like polls, right? And you go ahead and you ask Americans what they want. You ask a series of questions. What will make your life better? And when you start to ask them that, you kind of it kind of converges on the same issues. And it always turns out that these are progressive issues. These are issues that if you go ahead and say, hey, we want these things, these are socialist things or democratic socialist things. You said, well, you're not Stalinist and all that. Well, I don't believe in Stalinism either. But I mean, when I'm an engineer by training, I only care about numbers, right? So I do everything by numbers. I know that capitalism can't work because it's a number, and the numbers don't add up, right? So those are, and so when I look and I say that, I don't care if you're a genius from a genius economist, it just doesn't work. The numbers don't add up. When you bring that kind of certainty to people and let them know this is what you want, and guess what, folks, you're actually right. The things that people want are things that we can really attain and is real. It's then those people have to tell you and convolute your thinking so that that isn't true. So I mean, I think we're not leaders. I think we're facilitators in getting things out.
Well, speaking of Ella Baker and Ida B. Wells, I'm inspired by the figure of Fannie Lou Hamer, a sharecropper from Mississippi, dirt poor, who organized against seemingly insurmountable odds to launch the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party. I kind of have firsthand knowledge of this because, believe it or not, I was in Atlantic City in 1964 with a group of activists from New York, urging the Democrats, led by Lyndon B. Johnson of this great state, to seat the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party. They weren't successful, but they had a huge impact. And I think it just demonstrates once again what a handful of people can do. Ralph Nader just wrote an essay saying, give me 1 million people and I'll change the government in Washington. We'll block all the ministries. In fact, something like this just happened a year ago in Armenia, of all places, where an entrenched oligarchy was overthrown by hundreds of thousands of people in the streets who blocked the ministries, shut down the train stations, the airports, and literally changed the government. You might know that after the collapse of the Soviet Union, all of these former communist states just changed their clothes and became plutocracies. They became oligarchies and just as oppressive as the communists. And Armenia was no different. So there is an example, many examples of people organizing and fighting the power. What was tremendous about this revolution in Armenia, which was not covered at all here, even in the alternative press, forget about the corporate press, was that there were no casualties. It was nonviolent. Now, to the question of Americans, what do Americans want? I think fortunately, this is not a genetic problem. There's no scientific evidence that points to Americans being, disinclined to understand foreign affairs or economic issues. No evidence whatsoever. That's a good thing, because that means we can change it, because it's constructed. This artificial universe that many people live in is constructed. I was just looking over, ABC has a nightly news show. And we have to talk about corporate TV, right? 90% of Americans get their news, get their information from corporate TV. So mark this. This was I just did this. You can do it any night of the week. You all can be sociologists. You don't have to. You don't need a graduate degree from this university or from UT. ABC World News Tonight, Tuesday, March 19th. Lead story: charter bus crash in Virginia. Fatalities, bus on its side, sheriff says a terrible tragedy. Second article, second story, Houston oil tank fires. I guess you know something about this. Interview with a woman who said her eyes were burning terribly and she had nosebleeds. Third story, I'm not making any of this up. Robert Kraft sex scandal. He's the president, not just of Gillette, he's a billionaire president of the New England Patriots, and he was involved in a sex scandal in Florida. They had live coverage from the spa where supposedly Robert Kraft, engaged in illicit acts. Victor Oquendo was reporting. Then floods in the Midwest. Then Jeff Bezos emails sex photos appear in the National Enquirer. I'm not making any of this up. Go down the list. I've been doing this now just through the month of March. Every single night there's barely any coverage of international issues. About capitalism, the word is never spoken. U.S. imperialism, the word is never spoken. So we need to create a medium that speaks out on these issues, but not in a patronizing way, because that's a big, I think, drawback that we have. I'm so smart, what do you know? I know everything. Well, you may feel good like saying those things, but that's not a way to open people up to get to hear your message. So finding that voice and being humble without being humiliated is, I think, very important.
Fantastic. All right. So now we come to the Q&A portion of our panel. So if you have a question, you can raise your hand, or I'll break the ice. And I will.
Okay, so this one's to Secunda. You talked about, I guess, making social media more human. Did you have anything in specific regards, especially with regards to politics, with the way politics is kind of discussed on social media?
Yeah, I think some of the way that we discuss politics a lot of times on social media, and y'all check me if I'm wrong, but this is what you think, you are whack. This is foolishness. How dare you say this? We talk in a way that we would never speak to this same person in this classroom. We would never discuss it in that way. We would ask questions. We would try to understand. Not all the time, but we're in a space, because social media it's a space, right? We're there virtually, but we're there. But a lot of times it's not necessarily the words we use or the language that we use, it is just our posture. We talk a lot about posture because I think the most important thing is community, right? The most important thing is understanding. Even us as folks who believe 2 or 3 of the same things, right? But if we don't come to each other, just like what he said. Like, I know everything. You don't know Jack. You're ignorant. You don't understand. And we do this with our own families. So I think one of the most important things is to talk to people the way you would if you were sitting in this classroom.
Anyone have a response to that as well?
Just to add to that, I mean, it's critical to go where people are, not where we want them to be. I want them to know Gramsci. I want them to know Chomsky. Most people don't. So, it's meeting them where they are, not necessarily where you are.
I don't see any hope for Facebook. I mean, I don't know that people can be respectful in that format.
I mean, I just got into it with somebody today on Facebook. Let me just keep it real. And this is a person who I've met before, friend of a friend, but on social media we're really cool. He said something today, and it was like, if anybody know Nipsey Hussle, passed away. So there's a lot of conversation about who did it, why it happened. And for me, I was like, you taking up for the go. How do you know? He was very arrogant in his language, and I checked him for being that arrogant. How do you know, right? And we would use some real harsh words. I don't even talk like that in person. I was really wrong. He was wrong. I was wrong back. But then I realized, like, this is a relationship, right? This person is a writer. I respect their work. Not because they're a writer. That's not the point. The point is this person is part of this community, right? There are things about this person that is beneficial to us as a group of people. So I had to go back and be like, look, you know what? You're right. Not because I agree with you, because I don't. But this is your space. And I respect you. And in the spirit of unity, I shouldn't have came in here like checking you like this in your particular space. So I was able to, even though we were going like ham, I was able to step back and be like, hey, you're a human, I'm a human. And we're in this together, right? So those are small things, right? But small things are what's important. Small things is the way that we build. So.
So okay, now I understand what. So you first. Okay. Yes.
Okay, I guess I have maybe like a two-part question, but can handle it one at a time. And I'm addressing something you brought up, but anybody can answer. So you mentioned something about how like too often people just stay on, well, either they're just focusing their mental and intellectual energies on things that aren't that important, or they are political, but they just keep it to social media and just online, and they're not often enough like on the streets or getting involved in physically in organizations and that kind of thing. And I just wondered like what you thought might be, because I mean I've heard that kind of grievance a lot about people just not being willing to kind of physically go out into the streets and that kind of thing, and like what is a way to kind of be more persuasive to people to do so? Because it's not like, I've noticed anyway that people tend to think, well, a lot of people, I mean not like the most political people I know, but a lot of people think it's pointless to get out there on the streets. Or maybe they might not put it in those words, but like certainly the most like reactionary people will be like, get a job, why are you standing out there in the streets and that kind of thing, or that's not going to do anything and that sort of thing. But I think it's not only the most reactionary people that think that way. I think some people that are even sort of progressive just don't see the point of being out in the streets. They find it more useful to just have conversations with friends and that kind of thing. And so that was my first part of the question. And then the second part was like, I've also heard people say that it's not so much that people aren't willing to get out on the streets, like in Houston in particular, that it's not that people don't want to, it's just that this city, the logistics of it aren't conducive to people gathering, you know. We live so far from everywhere. And like even there's just not like an urban center like in like, you know, northeastern cities. It's just these big intersections with cars flying by, that kind of thing. So I guess I'm just bringing up both of those things. Like, what do you think is a way to kind of move people toward having more faith and getting out on the streets? And then secondly, how does a city like Houston overcome the logistical problem?
Can I respond?
Yeah.
Please? I tend to agree with the people who say that talking to your friends or family are the most important. So right now I'm reading a book. I always pull this book out. We're doing a course that's ended now on this book. The title of the book is Emergent Strategies. If you do not have this book, it is written by Andrea Marie Brown. She is brilliant. She's an organizer. She's a black woman. She loves Octavia Butler. If anybody knows who Octavia Butler is, she is a sci-fi writer. She says things like, you know, somebody else created this mad sci-fi fiction world that we lived in. Surely we can create something different. But she brings up this idea of fractals. You know, these little small patterns that change, that are everywhere. And one of the things that she mentions in this book is she talks about oftentimes we want change. We want to see something different, right? Like, for example, earlier I was talking about decentralized leadership. And then she asked the question, if this is something important to you in your home, is it decentralized leadership? What about in your neighborhood, your organizations or a church? Or if we can't do it on a small scale, we can't have these conversations on a small scale, you know, with the people in your house, how can we create that on a larger scale? That's why we continue to produce the exact same thing, because we really don't get it yet. We don't have it. And when you think about movements, like changing of culture, the change of mind, it doesn't necessarily happen in a very big, beautiful, organized, we get 50 people here with 100 people outside. Like the things that we saw happen in Houston, me as an organizer, a lot of times they had 100 cops meet us and it ended up being 15 of us. And things happen, right? Small change, small group of people, small community of people, but people who are really serious and really believe in what they're doing. So and a lot of times it's much more effective than these huge organizations who have to go by the numbers, who tell you we need 100 people to sign up on a list, who's directing people into doing what they think is important. The people who are part of this organization or this movement or in the streets have no voice in it. And they end up doing, like, you know, you asked the question earlier about, do I even believe in this? Like this movement. Well, you don't have no voice in it. So probably not, you know, in the end. So I those people are correct, but it doesn't mean that, like, that work doesn't mean be lazy. I'm not going to do anything, but be really intentional in that small area of influence that you.
David, what does the left media need to do to have a greater impact on what's going on in this country?
Be successful. Thrive. Have a prosperity consciousness. You know, too often at the Pacifica Network, I'll speak out of turn here, there has been so much internal fighting and sectarianism that has left the network in an extremely fragile situation, not just financially, but also, I think, emotionally and intellectually as well. Finding the language in a non-condescending way. As I said earlier, and as Egberto also mentioned, in issue after issue, people want the things that we want, that we're asking for, which is affordable housing, health care, universal health care, a clean environment. All of these things are majoritarian issues, and we've got to find a voice that is coherent and is also consistent, but is not dismissive of people who disagree with us. I think that's a big handicap that needs to be overcome.
I want to, because that was the magic right there. We have to be able to agree to disagree, because I think that is one of the biggest problems on the left. And since you brought up KPFT and issues at KPFT, and this isn't only to KPFT, but this is to all stations, all progressive media, all that sort of stuff. People don't know how to, if I disagree with it, look, if we really want to have, just like you have an ABC network, if you really want to have a progressive media, all the people in the progressive scheme, I think, need to learn how to get along and work together. In other words, on my thing, I try to integrate with as many other little programs that I can. Work with folks in Georgia, work with folks in LA, work in these different markets that nobody else want to sit down. People, none of us can be anything on our own. So I think if we take that magical thing, disagree, because if your show and my show don't agree on something, why should that mean that we still can work together and we're 1 + 1 is equal to 3. Where if I have your audience and you have my audience and I have her audience, we can actually grow together. Not only that, we can actually, by us getting along with differences, even if I differ with you, that is also instructed by example to other people that it can be done. And I wanted to jump in with something that you had said about Facebook. It's interesting, when I'm on Facebook, I have a completely different persona on Facebook, and that is, I never, ever get mad, right? Everything that every line that I answer is always like methodical. And it's amazing because I have, 10 pages or so, and rarely has it ever turned into flaming just because of that. And that's something that you just kind of learn later on. That is like, if you don't, I want to just give this as an example for something that happened on the show and how we get into trouble. Not how we get into trouble, but I do a Facebook Live show every day, and I take calls in and so forth. And to talk about disruption and all of that, somebody called into my show. The show was going great, and they just gave a litany of N-words, And the person that I had next to me, a white guy next to me, he's in shock. He doesn't know what the hell to do. He's in the studio with me, and he's like that. And, I'm smiling, right? It happens, and after the guy was in, I said, so were you having a bad day? And, the diffusion of the situation is the reason I'm using that is the diffusion of the situation in all these other kinds of issues is, I think, if we kind of learn those techniques. It's hard as hell. If somebody is disparaging you or whatever, you want to react. But if you can have that control, and if we in the left media, whatever media you want, I think if we can kind of get into that space, man, we can really, because already people want what we want. I think we can actually get something.
So the question is, what is the role of media for the left? And what do you all feel about, since this last election, we have progressive people now in Congress that are constantly being berated on Fox News. Now, unfortunately, the #1 news channel in this country is Fox News. And I don't listen to it very often, but when I do, left people aren't on it. But lately, they're constantly been downplaying AOC and Omar. And these two women have been excellent at fighting back. And that's when I'm a Vietnam War era guy, and I remember you make enough noise, it is on national media. You don't have to go to alternative media to hear this discussed. Bernie Sanders in 2016, suddenly you can talk Democratic Socialist is running for president. So, I think, well, I'd like to hear people's opinion about these figureheads now. And since no one wants to identify with a particular leftist party, all these people go around talking about, I'm progressive. And now you even get people running for the Democratic nomination that they ask, are you a capitalist? Yes. And the guy goes, and I think it was on Morning Joe or something, MSNBC, and they say, how is it this guy can't even identify, he's a multi-billionaire, he can't identify himself as a capitalist?
That is our job. That is what all of us here should. You see, you just said something that really hit. So many people call themselves progressives, but they are so scared to say, talk about capitalism being, just bad. They're just scared. When David talked about the craziest thing that you can't talk about is Palestine. When he says things like that, we have to have those 5 women back. I wrote probably 15 blogs in the last 3 days, and the vast majority was of Ilmar Omar, AOC, Ayanna Pressley, and the thing about it is, the way the internet works, right, is that as you amass material and as you cross-link, that is what shows up. So one of the reasons why Fox News and these guys are constantly having news stories about AOC and so forth from a negative point of view, and many different stories at that, is so that all those links start to show up when you look up AOC. That has implications on people who do searches. We have to be as well putting out material. Even if you are a Facebook person, no matter what, you have to have this search engine aspirating our points of view as well. And what happens a lot of times, in my humble opinion, is that we don't, we would say something one time and have an attitude like, okay, we say it one time, we've done said it already, so it's out there. They know better. It's who mentioned the stuff about what Hitler did? Repetition. Just like it works verbally, it's also the same thing that applies on the internet. If you go ahead and you scan AOC, and then look at the list of articles that show up on the internet, and see how many of those references, where they go. That tells you about the volume and of what's happening. So as far as doing, my part or whatever is writing those stories, writing those blogs, writing all these things day after day after day, so that you permeate that space with our point of view as well.
Okay, so I guess I'll abuse my moderator privilege and ask the question then. I wanted to ask the questions, again, following up on something that you had mentioned in your opening remarks about a sense of even like shifting this towards the left. And I wanted to sort of ask to what extent has the left in the media or the left media just become a kind of anti-right media at times? I mean, I was just sort of thinking, like, in terms of this last, you were mentioning in terms of sometimes your news is just, not yours, or just general radio stations, or just, you talk about whatever the hell Trump did that day, and it just kind of responds to it. And to a lot of the public, it looks like the left is just the anti-right. It's not really a left, it's just the opposite of whatever that is. Whereas, I guess historically, the left was supposed to raise, and you had mentioned this as well, the possibilities for things, not just, Trump says blue is the best color, we think it's red instead or something, but rather that what are the possibilities that are present that are even being secluded somehow, or hidden or obscured, and that could be a role of the media. So I was just sort of wondering if maybe some of the ambivalence towards the left that I think... Can I
bring up something that is sort of around that but different? So when I think of the left also, I think in terms of language, right, and race. I think of when a particular something happens and there is an African American in the center of the story. Left media and sometimes even alternative media will use the very same language. It's not much different from Fox, right? I even think in terms of like what happens during Harvey, right? Or doing any natural disaster, right? Who's being covered? Like, who are you talking about? Who's being left out? And if you're not talking about particular communities, if you're only focusing on Montrose, or if you're only focusing on, I didn't mean Montrose, I can't think right now, y'all know something, right? If you don't focus on Northeast Houston, right, where it's predominantly black and brown, where it is flooded, where the fire department was not sent at all in Houston, right? If no one is saying those stories, like, what is the left to me? It's no use. It's useless. So there's political, there's Trump, but there are many layers that hit home, and it just does not feel like a solution to the issues. But there's another problem. So dealing with the left, I have to educate, and then I'm educating. I'm saying the same thing over and over again. It feels like a waste of time.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. And I just wanted to say, back when we covered Northeast, and we actually brought that up.
I know. I mean, I'm not saying so.
I know.
Yes, but I mean, just as a whole,
yeah.
Right? Because I mean, there are particular shows on KPFT. Like, I listen to your show. Of course, I listen to Robert,
yeah.
Dr.
Yeah.
Muhammad. It's not Robert no more.
Yeah.
But so I'm not saying like this is end all be all, but I'm talking about the consistency. And don't get me wrong, there are some alternative media who eventually showed up. Showed up. But it's, again, I still believe a lot of times I feel like there's not a solution. It's not a effective solution all the time. Now, if it was 10 shows like yours, right, or 10 shows with some of y'all coming up with, then maybe I feel like that. But it's not.
I think that is where you have to join the platform. What I mean by that is that word that we like to use, Bogarting.
But I'm in.
Yeah.
I'm in on the ground.
Yeah, I'm not talking about you. I'm not talking about you. I'm talking when I say you, I'm talking about that is what I mean. It's one or two is not enough, And that when I talk about how in a whole lot of different issues that I always talk about, we have to, you don't wait for permission or you don't wait for the question. But I mean that is hard on people to just go ahead and say, I'm gonna do that. Not everybody have that attitude that say, well, to hell, I'm going in.
And we have, you mentioned earlier about how people that are not, sometimes it's hard to work with different people. I think the saving grace for us, so I'm with BLMHTX in Houston, and there are several organizations that we were in coalition with when Harvey hit. We don't agree with all of them. But what came to mind was there's another gentleman, I call him Autumn Raw, that's his name, who just launched, I think it's One Action Media, but he visited our show, and what he told us, what he shared with me was like, we meet together where we agree, right? And we were able, these people with all these different ideologies and philosophies and understanding of what's gonna help us to work together because we just met where we agree. And left the other stuff alone.
That's the way to do it. That's the way to do it.
I have a question.
Yes.
I'm asking you, for the four of you, as you said earlier, what the left would need is a win. Is that what you said? A win. A win.
A win. Okay.
What he's asking if we said that what we need is a win.
This gentleman just here. I'm sorry.
I said we need to be successful.
Successful.
Yeah.
That's the language. As we're all sitting here and looking at y'all, from each one of you, I want to know who is it you think we are that you're talking to?
He's asking when we said what we need is a win, who is the we?
No. I'm asking specifically just of you, all four of you.
Yeah.
Us, the audience,
Right.
sitting here now in this moment.
Right.
Who is it you think we are?
Let's say, if you're talking about me, who do I think you are?
All of you.
We are we. In other words, I think we are all a part of this. We are all a part of people that I think we consider. We know that we consider ourselves left of center. I actually think the vast majority of Americans are, but I think we are people thinking that we have common interests in the things that we want. That David was talking about before. Am I grasping the question?
I apologize. There's no aggression in what I'm asking. I just want to know who you think your audience is here now. The gentleman said, and I apologize. I'm bad.
David.
David. You said that you need to go to their places. You don't need. You don't. I apologize. Talk in
To where they are is what he said.
Go to where they are.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, in that question, and we need to be successful, or the left needs to be successful, who do you think your audience is today, right now? In this room?
Okay, well, to answer your question specifically about alternative radio, which is this 1-hour program I do, it's on 250 community radio stations in the United States and Canada. So, I'm not saying that it's, a great, gangbuster organization. It is reaching, thousands of listeners, just as the programs on KPFT reach thousands of listeners. I mean, what we need is to build on these institutions and create new ones that are particularly focusing on women of color, people of color, issues critical to the environment, because that's where the future is.
For me, the we is anyone in this room who is concerned about the ending oppression. Particularly, I mentioned people of color, African Americans in particular. In my mind, if we can end racism, if we can end oppression when it comes to black folks, that's everybody. If you get us, you get everybody. And in my mind, if there's anyone in this room who are in places of influence, who are concerned about liberation for people, then we are we. If you're not concerned about that, if that's not important, if Trump is the concern for you, then you are not we. I have nothing against you, have nothing, but that's not that's not the we. Because again, for me, then again, that's not a solution to the problem.
I love that you said that if Trump is, and that's so right. I rarely just talk Trump, because Trump is just a symptom of something that's been going on for a long. Trump is not like anything new. He's just an instantiation of it, so.
What a question. I would not presume to know who we are. I would hope that we have common ground, common interests, that we're compassionate people. I think you could disagree with me strongly about something and I wouldn't understand it as an audience, you could actually say, I don't believe what you're saying is helpful or accurate, and I would not understand why you were saying that, because I probably wouldn't say anything that I felt was on shaky ground or dishonest. I would listen and learn, at that moment, and probably, feel a little chagrined, a little embarrassed by my ignorance. But we could get through that, and I just would hope, I assume, what I assume about people who are here, that you care enough about a better world to show up to an event like this. I think I would assume that, but that's beyond that.
Another question.
Oh, it's sweet. I think we should get.
I have a question. It's like, so talking about like educate, you've spoken to education. You feel like you've educated, where you're required to educate people a lot. You spoke to the idea about David. You spoke to the idea about like avoiding being condescending. How do you grapple with the idea, like just the concept that, you know, if there's a presumption that you're right, that you're correct, and that there's a correct view or a correct perspective. How do you grapple with the kind of that idea, and then specifically, what if you're not right? You know, what if you're not correct? Does that question ever circulate? And then what are your thoughts on it? It's a question for all four people. It's a question I think about myself a lot.
Well, I think you always have to examine your assumptions and where you're coming from. Whatever you might be thinking is not gospel. It should be interrogated. It should be investigated. Examples should be given. Is the revolution happening in the hall?
Do you want me to go? I can go.
Are we missing the revolution?
No, I can go. Ask them to quiet down.
Yeah.
Do you think? Does everybody think I should do that?
I can hear. They could. Yeah, don't.
All right.
Yeah.
We'll just speak extra loud. We'll prepare for when we're on podiums later, you know.
David, please continue. You're saying it's not gospel.
Yeah, so to always look for new sources of information. It's just interesting. Today I'm in touch with Ms. Brown, trying to get her on alternative radio, and we're trying to set something up. So intersectionality. How about that? We talk about coincidences. Intersectionality is important. And to the point that was made earlier, I also think we need to drop in on some of these right-wing programs and find out what they're saying. Not live there, but go there. Listen to Sean Hannity if you can. Read the Breitbart News once in a while, or the Drudge Report, or Red State, or InfoWars, this mad conspiracy theory channel that Alex Jones runs. If get a taste of what is the toxins that are being injected into people's minds. That's why 63 million of our fellow citizens voted in 2016 for the current occupant of the Oral Office, right? The Oral Office, made famous during Clinton.
Right.
We can't dismiss that. 63 million. We're not talking about a handful of people here. 63 million people voted for this guy. Where are they coming from? And how do we reach them? Some people are not reachable, quite frankly, and you have to make an editorial decision, as I'm sure you do on the radio, and Michael, you do. You say, okay, enough. But others are halfway and should try and find out where they're coming from, what their concerns are, in, again, a non-condescending way. I think it's the key to building a movement, because we have a lot of emotions in this country, but no movement. And speaking to Black Lives Matter, as Mumia Abu-Jamal said, when have Black Lives mattered? In American history, when have Black Lives mattered? In the 1700s? In the 1800s?
On my shows, I always tell people, there are two things. I talk about the bidirectionality of the way I do the show, and the reason why is that to have communication with the people that you're talking to. And the good thing about it is, I always tell them, remember, we're all fallible, and don't take anything that I say, look it up. And I tell them that all the time, look up the stuff that I talk about, and I think actually that may give people more, you're asking somebody to look it up. So I ask them to look it up, but most importantly, I think that bidirectionality is important, because, like I said, I honestly, from the audience, learn a lot, because this stuff that they have that they call about, on these game shows you see on TV sometimes, where they ask the audience, what is the pulse of the audience? And the pulse of the audience is usually right? I mean, most of the times you ask the audience and the audience turn out right. So I like the idea of talking things out. And the one other thing, I live in Kingwood, red area. I live in a Starbucks where I do my writing and do the shows. Most of the people I talk to are Trump supporters. And one of the interesting thing about it is they see my car out there. A lot of them are coming in to talk. And the reason why is that you learn to do more listening than talking. And if you happen to listen to people more, they have a tendency to listen to what you have to say. So it's that simple.
Some things, there is not a question there's not a question for me on the value of Black life. There's not there are some things that are unquestionable. There are some things that are true, that have been true, that people have been saying before I picked up my little mic and began to say it. Those things, you can't shake me on those things, right? Now, how to get those things, how for the solution for those, they open, they change, all of those things change. But there's some things I will not argue. There's some things I won't even try to convince you of, because my humanity is not in a place where I'm going to convince somebody about the value of a young man's life as it relates to being incarcerated, or as it relates to even the relationship between police and a particular community. There's a particular way that that's not my work. My work is focusing on the imagination for those who want it already, right? What is already being created? How can we go somewhere different? How can we create the things we want to see? How do we get that done? What are we not using? That's my role in this space. And I know that each of us have our own, and our own thing. But I think a lot of times, at least for me, it's not only is it difficult, or I feel like, it's moving, trying to convince folks, but even spending too much time talking about what the problem is. There is a time for that, and I did mention education. There's an opportunity for educating, but some stuff I can't educate. You know better than I do, right? Like people know, right? There's clarity that happens, but it's like, how do we uplift more of what we want to see? How do we use this? We were talking earlier about saying the same thing over and over again. How do we continue to say, imagine a world that we want to see? We're creating it. It's here. It's done. This is where our value is. We don't need to go here. We got it here. And then eventually we believe it. That's where my time and concern is. And again, kind of like what I said earlier, if I'm wrong and I'm able to see it, or even if it's not always important for me to be right. That's not the point. It's not about me. It's never about me. It's never about the organization. It's about what we're trying to do. What's the most important? And I think if your posture is not centered on you most of the time, and moving ourselves of pride, then you're in a position where you can move, because you're gonna be wrong. You're gonna mess up. But just always be willing to yeah, I'm wrong, but I'm here. So what can we do now?
So the question was, how do I know when, as a lefty, I might be off track?
How do you engage with the concept, or the possibility, and especially when we're talking about education and educating people through media, through whatever form? That it could be a miseducation. Just that idea. I think about that with myself.
All the time, yeah. And I told you, I guess that's why I brought up my early history. Recovering Catholic, we Catholics like to say, or a Thomist, or Pope, and having some authority. I mentioned Stalin, and I have to be cautious of that. And And still, as a lefty and returning to, and I've been returning to texts that are historical, and I come up with ideas like value, and we're under capitalism. So I belong to a kind of left group that, follows Marx and is critical of capital. Now, there you have the problem of the Pope again, right, with Marx, and so I question that. So, but I understand that we're in a social relation, with each other, and yet I have an idea that the social relation is guided by Marx, and so I have more questions than anything, and I'm quite sure that I'm off track, that we are, maybe.
One of the things that Chomsky says in almost every speech he gives, he tells the audience, don't believe me, check it out for yourself. Did the U.S. have a hand in overthrowing Salvador Allende in Chile? Don't believe me. Read. Talk to other people. I think owning the information is important, rather than, I heard something that, Secunda or Egberto said or Michael said that was really clever. I'll just parrot what they said. No, I don't think that's desirable. It's important that you own the information. So check it out.
All right, so let's give our panelists a round. Oh, do we have one more?
I have one.
You have a question?
I have like a story and then a question. You know about it on campus. I'm in Students for Democratic Society, and we're working with
Can't hear a word.
Yeah, just speak up, please. Yeah. Or you can come from the screen.
Alright, I'm Students for Democratic Society, and we made a coalition on campus called the Defend Our Voice Coalition with 13 different student boards. And this semester we have a campaign focusing on slashing the clause. We're slashing the HB 89 clause, the anti-boycott Israel clause, and basically how it affects students on campus. It's in order for a student organization to have a speaker come on campus, UH makes that speaker sign a clause that says they won't boycott the state of Israel, and for what the fuck, that's fucked up. So I don't know,
That's a state law. It's not really anything the administration can do anything about.
I know, but the point is we're gonna make this movement, I guess. I don't know. It sounds pointless, but in just 4 days, we had a petition and we collected 1,510 signatures, and in the semester that we plan on giving it to Purdue on camera, very dramatically and stuff. And then, but the problem we've had so far is fucking school newspaper, Coop News and Coop Media and the little radio. They never take our stories, and even if they do, by the time they're done editing it, they completely erase the message. And so media, y'all are media people, right? I don't know how do you get around that.
First, go ahead, please.
No.
All right, let me tell you first of all, I'll get correct. Anything that you want out there, I'll put it up. But more importantly, I think that you have to realize your power, and you can put it out. I link to you, you link to him, and so forth. That is how we have to do it. I don't have anything that you don't. So you can actually be a seed with these activities that you want to do, and email them to people that want to help get a message out. What we are somebody like me. I'm lucky, and I say honored that I have a voice at KPFT. I'm lucky and honored that I have a website now that has some traffic. And you know what I want to do with that? Tell your message. You see what I'm saying? And if we learn to collaborate like that as lefties, we'll do fine, because guess who's already doing that? If you notice, you see something on Breitbart, it then appears on Fox, and then appears on... They collaborate. That's what I want.
He said it, so who are the people that will? That's the question. Who is it that has the audience that are sensitive or that are concerned with what you all are doing? Is it instructors? Is it a particular department? Is it some professors? Who are they, and what is their sphere of influence? audience, and you can use that because all media is trying to get the largest amount of people to hear a certain story at one time. That's it, and you want to kind of spread this message. So maybe those things are not going to work for you. Maybe they're not going to do it. How do you go around them? And usually what happens is when you're able to go around them, then they don't come back to you. Then, because then you're the story, and they want the story. And again, don't think that you have to have all the number. I know you need a certain number of petitions to do that. There's also old school ways where what they mentioned earlier, where you have to knock on doors. I don't know how that works in campus, but other ways to do it. But I'd definitely be willing to give you my information. And I know some folks on campus who probably will help you if you don't have a connection with them already to talk after this.
Also, like your question, I feel what he's saying because like y'all are saying like the left, like they're not leftists. Like, do you not consider yourself leftist, or like why are y'all hesitant?
I don't hesitate of calling myself. I read my stuff and you see that I'm a damn leftist. But the kind of leftist that I am though, I come across a lot of times to folks like I'm just pretty darn. I don't walk with a sign that says I'm a democratic socialist. I'm a democratic socialist. But those are my values.
So to be clear, what I mean is leftist to me is whiteness, right? So it is oftentimes for me it feels like another level of white supremacy. So when I think of it in those terms, no. And if that's what it is, no. And I judge it by what is this space like? Well, what is this group like? So it's very difficult for me in particular to identify as leftist. But if I gotta go group by group, person by person. Are these particular people concerned about Black liberation? Are these particular people concerned about other issues that I'm concerned about? Are they concerned about the immigrant? Are they concerned about Palestine? Are they concerned about who's ever been oppressed? And for me, number one, are you concerned about Black liberation? If you're not, and you're concerned about all those other things, no, you're not. You're not my ally. So, but I have to say that in every room that I go in, because if I don't, who will? Who else is gonna speak up for Black people? Who else is gonna say it? That's my responsibility. So that's why, although it's a label. It's a reality, and I question it.
So let's give our panelists a round of applause. That was really,